What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Anime Princess here, coming at you with a 3.21 Cold Spark build guide. This is a starter package that costs roughly 35-40 div. You can easily buy the gear, slap them together. As for the gearing stats, we easily have above 500,000 effective HP pool, and this is with Molten Shell turned off. So if you have that on cast and damage taken, it is going to be higher. The reason it's so high is we're an Aegis build that caps attack block and spell block without using glancing blows. Now, this is very strong for most mapping scenarios, except for a case where you take a massive hit from a boss and you don't block it. And if we disable the block completely, the HP pool is still above 100,000. So even in the worst case scenarios, it is a very tanky build. As for damage, we do have baseline damage of 4 million on one spark hit. And if you're doing maps that are more tightly packed, you can obviously hit more than one spark per cast. So the upper end is roughly 17 million on my gear. Please keep in mind, this is a budget of 35 to 40 div. So I wasn't trying to pump too much damage into it. I really wanted to have it well-rounded. If you're going to start this character, you should be planning to, in my opinion, just keep scaling the damage. There's so many vectors where we can just pump the damage to the moon. So this is a very baseline damage that should be good to do any sort of mapping, any sort of difficult content in mapping. For anyone who has been following my League Start guide, I would suggest transitioning over to a tree similar to what I'm doing over here. The tree's slightly different because we're making use of some of the new masteries, and I've just made some changes to make it much better in my opinion. And for anyone who's looking to start a second build, just farm up 35-40 divs and you should be good to go. You can start right here. Let's jump straight into the shopping list. First off, this is an Ashes of the Stars build, which are running around 14 divines right now. You want to target one that has at least 19% increased reservation efficiency of skills. The reason for this is it will give us overleach on our Petrified Blood, which is a very big defensive layer. To test out if you do have overleach, you want to put on a life flask. You want to cast to make sure you are all the way down to Petrified Blood low life, and then press your life flask. If your life goes up at all, it means you are going to be permanently overleaching. Next up is our body armor, which costs roughly 5 divines to self-craft. There's a Spark content playlist on my YouTube channel, which has a bunch of crafting guides, including a crafting guide on this. We get base spell critical strike chance, frenzy charge on hit, and a bunch of spell block and attack block, which is very important because our next item, Aegis Aurora, depends on block and armor. Aegis Aurora, it's 2 divines. Large cluster jewel, you can check it in the POB. It's going to be roughly 2 to 4 divines. The most important parts of that cluster are the Doriani's Lesson, which gives us a form of lifesteal, as well as Storm Rider, which gives us our power charges, as well as a bunch of damage. The other node on there is just random. This large cluster, again, it's optional because you can go for a higher budget that includes Forbidden Flame and Flesh. There is Harmony of Purpose, as well as Conviction of Power, which also solves the charges. If you go that route, you'd look for a different large cluster, but this is a pretty good baseline cluster right here. For the Watcher's Eye, we really want to hit attack block on there because it's hard to cap attack block otherwise. For 2 divines, you might be able to get a second mod as well. Rare jewels cost around 2 div each. I have some triple crit multi. Crit multi jewels are the best way to increase our damage. Crit multi is huge because we're a 100% spell crit. And you're going to want to get Corrupted Blood, so I bumped one down to double crit multi with Corrupted Blood. That's a fairly big investment, but this really cranks up our damage, so it's important to get. Now there's some relatively cheap stuff at the end. Anomalous Arrogance is important to get the Overleach. It's another component. You might notice mine is level 21, quality 20. You actually only need to have a 20/20, so don't worry about getting level 21 on there. Divergent Inspiration just lowers the mana cost. You might not need it. Our mana cost issues, we don't really have any, but it's pretty cheap and it's a good investment. Awakened Added Lightning, that's 30C, and a Heatshiver is 15C. This rounds out to a budget of around 30 to 40 div. As for the other pieces of gear, they're all fairly insignificant costs. There's a crafting guide on how to make a basic wand, basic pair of double pierced gloves on the Spark playlist, so you can look into that. Not significant investment. Belts just cap and res. Boots just cap and res. I guess of note would be you do want gloves to have the freeze. You inflict spreads within a radius because the build is cold spark, and this is just it makes everything feel so much better in maps. Moving on, I feel the need to touch on the Heatshiver interactions as well as our defensive layers because there might be a knowledge gap there that needs to be bridged. First off, on Heatshiver, this gives us basically double damage on the condition that we freeze. And to freeze enemies, we need to have a crit, which means we want to be 100% crit capped. And we need to convert all our damage to cold so we're getting the biggest cold hit possible because your cold hit is what determines if you freeze or not. Now, if you're playing on lower damage levels, you might notice some enemies aren't getting freeze locked. It's going to be very evident if you're freeze locking a boss or not. And if it's not getting freeze locked, that means your hit damage isn't high enough. You can see your hit right here. So just keep in mind on lower damage levels, if you're not hitting that threshold, it might be more valuable to scale stuff like crit multi rather than cast speed. Even if you're going to get similar total DPS boosts, you really want to boost that hit. The build still functions without a Heatshiver, so if you're trying to play this on a lower budget, feel free to take off the Heatshiver, and in that case, you can take off one of the Call of the Brotherhoods. But even if you're not hitting freeze on everything, Heatshiver is still fine. You will eventually get there, and once you get there, the damage ramp is just going to go through the roof. On to defenses, we are an Aegis build, so we're going to be building our defenses around the Aegis Aurora shield, which gives us energy shield recovery equal to 2% of our armor when we block. First off, we are going to want to cap our attack block and spell block. Attack block's a little harder to cap. In order to do this, we're going to want a max rolled attack block, Watcher's Eye. We're also going to want to path all the way down here to grab the attack block. Thankfully, we get a lot of crit multi for the mastery and we get immunity to stuns, so this pathing is actually pretty good regardless. The last bit of attack block is achieved through the Rumi's Concoction and the body armor. If you're able to unveil chance to block attack damage in the prefixes, that gives us 10% chance to block versus 7% crafted. This is pretty huge if it's possible to do. However, even if you don't, you're still going to be pretty close to block chance cap. I believe Crucible trees can push this further if you want. Keep in mind that block chance scales multiplicatively like the resistances, so just hitting 75% is crazy if you can do it. And the closer you get to 75, the more you want to push all the way. As for spell block, a lot of it's on the tree. We use Tempest Shield to get some. You can craft it in the body armor prefix as well. I don't value life too highly on the body armor. My prefixes are attack block, spell block. So we have EHP pool right now. It's 770,000 with Molten Shell up. We do have some defensive layers that don't necessarily scale with the Aegis. Some of them are Mastery here, which applies our armor onto chaos damage taken from hits. This is useful because they're monster modifiers that give Fizz as extra chaos. Another defensive layer, again, is Lifesteal, Doriani's Lesson. And the extra endurance charges on the Enduring Composure synergize very, very highly with armor to make us much tankier against Fizz hits than we would be otherwise without the endurance charges. So these are the baseline defenses. It's very, very tanky. You need to use all of them. We've got the cam off to quickly go over skill gems and passive tree. I explain these passive trees and League Start guides and stuff for 35 to 40 div, just slap it on and go. I don't feel like I need to talk too much about this. I will just give some little points of interest. If you want the most damage, you're going to use pinpoint support. You're going to notice I don't use pinpoint support. That's because this caster mastery, 25% chance to open nearby chests is just so fun to use. It'll open all your blight chests. It'll open, hop into that unique map, Vaults of Aziri. It just opens everything. Just cast the spark. I can't live without this, so we're just cutting our damage, not using pinpoint. But if you do want to min-max, you go +1 intensity because you can't use pinpoint without that. Massive damage boost. It's the most interesting point on the tree, I believe. Everything else, you just copy it. As for the skill gems, we're using a Vol Spark even though the Vol portion is fairly useless. This is because the body armor gives +1 to level of Vol skill gems, so if we're able to double corrupt into a 21 Vol spark, it's just a free DPS boost. As for the gems, if you want to use the pinpoint with the caster mastery for intensity, you would drop hypothermia, and you can invest 7 to 8 divs for an awakened spell echo. However, I don't want to raise the budget, so we're just using a basic one. For Petrified Blood, we do need Anomalous Arrogance in order to get the Overleech on our life. Molten Shell cast for damage taken. We do have an Enlighten with Tempest Shield, Zealotry, Determination. Alt quality Tempest Shield is pretty good. It gives us bonus spell block. Frost Shield, the Anomalous doesn't really matter. Flame Dash, movement skill. Shield Charge, another movement skill. Defiance Banner, Anomalous is pretty good at giving us extra armor, so if this is affordable, I would go for that. A Tornado with Culling Strike. Now, Tornado seeks out bosses, so it is really useful to throw this down. You're fighting a boss, and the boss is getting low. Also, Tornado just is a pretty decent DPS boost regardless. Sniper's Mark, it's the obvious curse we use. Herald of Ice, Herald of Ice pops. What more do I need to say? Now on to some very important miscellaneous information. The first one is, you might have noticed we are going Petrified Low Life, but we don't have Pain Attunement on our passive tree. That is because we're speccing Pain Attunement on our Crucible passive tree. So at the bare minimum, your Crucible passive tree for your wand should have Pain Attunement. Just keep slamming that in until you win that 50-50. As for the Pantheon, we are taking Brine King. You might notice we haven't captured all the bosses. We are stun immune, so we don't need that boss. And for Reduced Effect of Chill, this will lock you out of swapping over to self-chill. I do have a guide on my channel from last league on how to swap over to a self-chill variant. It doesn't take too much gear swapping, and the passive tree can stay exactly the same. So, you might want to not capture that just to keep your options open. As for the Minor God, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing red altars, you want Soul Abrath. If you're not, just choose whatever you feel like you need. I think I've touched on everything I need to for this 35 to 40 div Spark template. If you're looking for additional info, make sure you check out my Spark content playlist on my YouTube channel. Make sure you follow for additional videos, and make sure you join my Discord, because that's a really good place to just talk about the skill, just talk about Path of Exile in general. I should be live after this video goes up. If you want to jam out to Lana Del Rey and watch me blast some maps, I'll see you there.